So everybody, this is Dr. Kulasa. She's going to talk to us about insulin drip transitions from IV to sub-Q.
Okay, so first we're going to start with some background data of a little project Kevin and I and a couple people did, maybe, if I can get the slides to work. Which I think Kevin presented a lot of this data at one of your staff meetings, but in case all of you didn't hear it, we will review quickly the insulin drip transition data. I think this is from a year, probably 2 years ago at this point. We screened 267 patients, so we looked at every single drip transition over 3 months at both hospitals. We found 267 patients. We ended up excluding 56, left us with 211. And we were looking to evaluate the transition, whether they were transitioned using our paper protocol, computer protocol, or de novo, whatever the provider decided. We broke them down into patients with diabetes versus no diabetes. We had 146 patients with diabetes and 65 without. We found of the patients without diabetes, no matter what they did, transition to insulin or not, they did fine because they don't have diabetes and they have a beautiful pancreas that can function. So 56 successful and 3 unsuccessful. When we slice and dice that by service, they all did good. So our algorithm, which we're going to go over in more detail, works. Question 2, does the patient need insulin? Does the patient have diabetes? If the answer is no, you don't have to transition them to basal bolus insulin. They can go to correction scale and finger sticks, so we can catch those 3 out of the 65 that were unsuccessful. Okay? So the algorithm works. Of the 146 patients with diabetes, or who swore they didn't have diabetes, yet they had an A1C greater than 6, these patients, we broke it down to see if they were transitioned using one of the protocols, paper or computer, which are pretty much the same, weight-based, which we all know is way more conservative, or some original one by the provider. Okay, so of our 25 using the protocol, 15 were successful, 10 were unsuccessful. There were 2 hypo events, one each from paper and computer. The 1 patient transitioned using weight-based, shockingly, was unsuccessful. And of the 82 with some unknown or other method, 39 of them were successful and 43 were unsuccessful, and they had 5 hypo events. Okay, so the definition we use to define successful transition is your blood sugars over the first 24 to 48 hours average had to be under 180 with no hypoglycemia. That's how we defined successful. So this was a paper that was done by a similar group, ours here, back in 2008. So we were basically repeating this study. And we tried to align these 2 graphs so you can see. Back in 2008, our same protocol was very successful. It is equally as successful now. Patients without diabetes back in 2008 did great when they weren't transitioned to any insulin, and they still do great. The biggest difference is the patients with diabetes who were transitioned using no protocol. Back in 2008, they had an average blood sugar over those first 24, 48 hours in the 200s, whereas now our providers, while they are not following protocol and not particularly successful, they are not as unsuccessful as they were back in 2008 because our average blood sugar now is back in about the 175 range. Okay?
Can I make it to the full screen?
Yeah. Is it not?
No, because then they can't see.
Oh, they'll see it.
It's also small.
Yeah, that's fine. Does that work? Can they see?
Oh, that's good. Do you know where you're at?
Right there. That's fine. Okay, so what this is showing is that our patients with diabetes or an A1C greater than 6 need to be transitioned to sub-Q basal bolus insulin using one of our paper or computer protocols, as that leads to more success. There's no harm. Because the rates of hypoglycemia on both methods were actually about the same and very low for whether they were following protocol or not. So again, we've made a lot of headway. Even though they're not using protocol, they're doing decent orders. Okay. Okay, so when we slice and dice by service, we found there were some outliers, particularly pulmonary critical care here in Hillcrest, as well as, you guys can't see all that. Oopsie. The rest was medicine Hillcrest, and medicine La Jolla. Okay, they also happen to have the most patients and the most transitions, but they were our outliers. So we took this data to P&T and we requested an order to be created for insulin drip transition per pharmacy. Because what we were finding, especially up north in the CT surgery patients particularly, they would just transition them to scale and then call endo or pharmacy in the morning. So we would just like to subtract 12 to 24 hours and do it right the first time and not lose any of that time and benefit that we got from having them on the drip in the first place. Okay, so this is an easier way, because a lot of the feedback I'm getting from the people in La Jolla too is that it's hard to get a hold of a pharmacist just to ask them a question quickly and get easy recs. Actually, I'm getting the same thing from here in Hillcrest. It's the medicine teams in particular. Now they're all over, but at that moment they want the transition. They'd like to be able to just pick up the phone and ask somebody, or put in this order and open that dialogue, which we can talk about how that's going to be, how this button is going to work. But since you guys are going to be getting the request to help transition more once this is actually created, hopefully in the not so far future, because it has been approved, I want to make sure everybody is comfortable with transitioning from an insulin drip. So that's what we're going to go over today. Any questions so far on the data? Yes.
For those patients that were the transition was just kind of not protocol or not weight based, were those more conservative compared to the protocol, or were they more aggressive?
More conservative. We gave a 10% error on following protocol versus not. If they deviated more than 10%, we called it other. So it was more conservative, the majority of them. Any other questions? Okay, so let's get into insulin drip transitions. This is our paper protocol. Okay, we're going to go through it step by step. It is the exact same as the computer protocol that's all built into our calculator, except for this one step, which my slides didn't work when we converted to this step, but it's this step right here. The calculation is slightly different. Okay, the computer is going to use the ISC, where this is going to use the last 6 hourly rates. Okay, but they should be the same in almost all cases, as long as the drip rate is stable and the ISC is stable, which we need to talk about troubleshooting and when these methods aren't best. Yes. Yeah. So if you've had a really stable ISC overnight, and then the last one is like way different, it's going to use the last one. Yeah, so it might not be the same. So to find the paper protocol, you go to WebRef and medication resources, and then here it is under all our glucose management stuff right here. Here's our IV to sub-Q paper protocol. The computer protocol used to look like this. It is now built into the calculator. Okay, if you go to the insulin calculator, the transition calculator lives right here. It'll bring up this screen. You have to input the same pieces of data as you did in the previous calculator. Does your patient have diabetes? Yes or no? What was their last A1C? Okay, because this is asking the same questions as our paper protocol. Just in case you answered no to history of diabetes and their A1C is 11, then it's going to count it as having diabetes. And then it wants to know the patient's nutritional status and what they're on currently. okay? Because we're gonna use those things in the calculation. Once you enter those 4 answers, it spits out some recommendations for you. You will relay that to the team, and voila, a transition recommendation has been completed.
How does that A1C, does it just matter for the A1C, doesn't matter if it's just as long as it's greater than 6, it doesn't matter?
If you press no and the A1C is greater than 6, it's going to prescribe you basal bolus insulin. If you say no and your A1C is less than 6, it is going to tell you correction scale only.
So it doesn't matter if the A1C is 8 versus 11.
Correct. That is correct.
If you say yes, it doesn't matter what that A1C is.
Correct. Yeah, we'll go over that when we go over the troubleshooting. Okay, so step 1, and this applies to both. This is not built into the computer one, but you need to know it clinically. Like I said, these 2 algorithms are the same, just the calculation is slightly different, but it should lead to about the same answer. So step 1, is the patient ready for transition? They must no longer be critically ill or on vasopressors for the most part. And their blood glucose should be in range for all of the last 6 hours. So is the patient stable? Okay, because then we've used our drip to not only get their sugars under control, but to also figure out exactly what their requirement is. Okay, and we built this into the computer calculator, and that the calculator actually will not give you any answers unless the ISC has been stable for 4 hours. Okay.
You have to be careful because you may have to change the wording on the calculator now, because it looks, I've had people provide me feedback that if it's not providing a recommendation, it looks like it's just recommended scale.
Oh, okay.
So
let's bring that up on Monday. Yeah. Okay. The other thing you want to make sure is that whatever reason they went on the drip for, aka DKA or HHS, that those have both been completely resolved, and hopefully your gap has been closed at least for 2 checks before we transition. Okay? If they're on it for critical illness, then make sure their critical illness is resolved. It's typically about 4 hours. Yeah.
4 hours for what?
For DKA, the question was, is there a time frame between the 2 anion gap checks to ensure resolution of DKA? And typically it's done every 4 hours. Notably missing reasons, not reasons for transition, are a hypoglycemic event. Do you guys remember what the top 2 causes of hypoglycemia on the insulin infusion are? Interruption in nutrition or a dextrose source. And what else? Nurse not following the protocol and checking Q1 to 2 hours. Okay, if they went 2.5, 3 hours. Okay, those are our top 2 and almost all reasons for hypoglycemia on the insulin infusion. So if the patient becomes hypoglycemic and you get a call saying, hey, patient's hypoglycemic, we got to transition them, actually, you just need to figure out why they became hypoglycemic, teach the nurse the protocol, or look for a dextrose source that was interrupted and maybe have to reset the ISC or tell the nurse to press the yes button, as they should have done several hours before when that dextrose source was interrupted, and do some on-the-spot education.
it's especially useful if you catch it at the time to talk to the nurse. We have a very high proportion of unexplained hypoglycemic events, which we're 99% sure that there was an interruption in the source, but it's never documented, so we can't prove it. So you really have to kind of do some looking into on that.
Absolutely. For La Jolla, Kevin was just saying if there is hypoglycemia on the infusion, it requires on-the-spot discussion with the nurse so we can figure out what it is caused. Because when we go back retrospectively, due to stellar documentation, it is very difficult to often tell. Your blood sugar in range, in goal range for 1 to 2 hours is not an indication for transition. Remember, we need that at least 4 to 6. 8 a.m. is also not an indication for transition. Dr. Chu and your team. And patient ready to leave the ICU and be called out is also not an indication for transition, as the same transition protocol can be used in the IMU in both hospitals. Okay, same protocol, same everything. If somebody tries to tell you that they can't run it in the IMU or PCU or whatever we're calling it because they can't do Q1 hour, that is not true. They can follow the protocol just like everyone else. Any questions about that? Yeah, the computer automatically adjusts your goal range from ICU being 100 to 150 to PCU being 100 to 180, so that they are more likely to be in the Q2 hour range of blood sugar checks. But there is no, I don't care what's going on, even if it's telling them every 1 hour in the PCU, they have to do it.
Are we going to try to wait until like it's a normal time during the day? Because they want to
My favorite times for transition are 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., and that's pretty much the best times. Midnight, not, but you know, things happen clinically. People lose lines, they have to be transitioned. But ideally, we want it in a controlled setting. If you give the long-acting insulin at 10 a.m. or 4 p.m., you turn the drip off 2 hours later and cover that next meal at noon or 6. The timing works out just easier. Okay?
And it allows you to look at your transition the next morning before the water treat goes, so you can make all your adjustments.
Yeah.
Because we will be recommending to the physicians
Yes.
changes.
Transition to sub-Q step 2. Does the patient have diabetes or not? And this is where that A1C is going to play a big role. If they do not have known diabetes and their A1C supports that, being less than 6, you can transition them to correction scale only. But if they do have diabetes or their A1C is greater than 6, then they do need to be transitioned to basal bolus. This is an example of a patient without diabetes on the drip running at 7 to 8 units per hour. They were transitioned to scale only, and their blood sugar stayed in the 100s beautifully. Why is that? That's a very high rate of insulin that. So that is just telling you that their pancreas can make 7 to 8 units per hour. It is healthy. It is awesome. They don't have diabetes. Okay, but this patient with diabetes was on the drip at 2 to 3 units per hour. They were transitioned to scale alone, and their sugars are running in the 200s. This pancreas is not capable of running at least 2 to 3 units per hour. Therefore, they need supplemental exogenous sub-Q insulin. Questions? Okay, so if they do need basal bolus, there's several options. You can use the computer protocol button, which looks like this. It's going to spit out your recommendations. You can use 80% of the lowest of the following, or you can use the average hourly rate over the last 6 hours, which is what the the paper protocol walks you through. These two are my favorite and really the only offers we're going to give you. Okay, insulin drip transition step 3. You take that average insulin dose per hour for the last 6 hours. You multiply by 20, which is the same thing as 80% of 24. We don't need to go from 1 to 1 because we need a little bit room for error. Okay, sub-Q insulin is not as perfect. And also, whatever reason we went on the drip in the first place is hopefully getting better so that their insulin requirements will be decreasing. Step 4, you need to determine if that number you just calculated in step 3 represents their basal needs or their basal and nutritional needs. If your patient's NPO on normal saline, only on the insulin drip, that is your basal needs. If they've got TPN running, that's your basal and nutritional. Okay, so that's step 4. That's what I just told you. And then you need to give your basal insulin and then turn the drip off 2 hours after. It needs to overlap for 2 hours. It takes sub-Q insulin some time to get in and circulate.
Is that button still only going to be visible to us, not to the physicians or the nurses?
The transition button? It is only visible to pharmacy. Not even me.
She wanted it badly.
But luckily I know the equation. Right there on the screen. Okay, so when we're calculating that number, that total daily dose, the drip is telling you exactly what that patient needs. There's no joke about it. That patient is getting that amount of insulin, and they need that. For patients already on insulin, we can also take into account their home regimen, okay? We've had patients before who are very well controlled, maybe on 20 units at home, and their drip is saying they need 80. There's no joke that patient needed 80, okay? But it also makes you a little concerned that there's 60 unaccounted for units that might be due to stress and illness, that big gray cloud might be going away in the next couple days. Okay, so it just gets you a little bit thinking ahead of the curve, and that you might have to be peeling off a little faster. And then you can always take into account weight, but remember, these weight-based factors are extremely conservative. Okay, so your drip or your home regimen is going to be more indicative.
Even when you say use a multiplier of 0.5, you still think it's conservative?
Yes. So remember, for type 1 diabetes, the multiplier we use here is 0.3 units per kilo. In the real world, our type 1s are typically on about 0.5. And then for type 2 diabetes, we're telling you to use 0.5 or 0.6 units per kilo. And remember, our patients in the outpatient setting are on 1 to 2 units per kilo. So they're conservative. But again, they're not living the same life here. They're sedentary, they're sick, they're not eating, they don't have access to their, like, Cheetos. Okay. Yes.
How do you handle, I know every case is different, but how do you handle when there is that huge discordance between patient's home regimen and what the requirements are of the drip? Do we go a little bit more conservative with basal and get more short-acting heavy, or how do you
I asked the patient a lot of questions. The question is, what do you do when there's a lot of discordance between what the drip is telling you and what the patient's home regimen is telling you? I usually go with the drip, because that's a given, that's what they're getting, and it's the most accurate.
But if you're anticipating that whatever their acute processes is proving,
So that's why you're subtracting 20% to account for that. There are times where I'll go a little bit more conservative and subtract 30%, maybe 40%, but you usually don't have to do half. There are some patients that I know very well, and I know what their in-hospital regimen is, no matter what they tell me at home. And that we might be a little bit more conservative, but usually I go by the drip.
for patients that you've had to start on E5 in order to get the gaps in those, how do you account for that? Because you're going to be stuck in E5 with the drip on the transition.
Mhm.
How do you account for that?
So you put it in, when you do your calculator, you put yes, nutrition, and on D5,
You're counting that as
it's nutrition. Yeah, for sure. And on those transitions, you'll see the calculator will transition you to a 40% basal, 60% nutritional regimen to account for dextrose in the straight IV. It's pretty powerful. Yes.
When you have a discordance between what the patient says and the recs in the computer calculator, what are your questions that you go ask the patient?
I ask them what they actually take. I ask them how many times they accidentally forget it. I ask them what they eat at home. I ask them what they snack on. I ask them what they drink. Because a lot of those patients drink juice or soda all day long, or have lovely, ice cream or sandwiches at night that account for why their home regimen got so high that we are not going to be providing them in the hospital, and therefore they won't need that extra coverage. And there's like one I got yesterday. She accidentally forgets it 6 days a week. So she was honest. I appreciate that.
Did you do any empiric steroid adjustments? Your patient's on steroids, did you adjust your initial regimen, or did you kind of just follow it day by day?
Follow it day by day, but you always have to be thinking ahead and knowing what like these are the transplant patients in particular who are on high dose steroids that are changing every day. Their drip requirement might be representing a methylpred dose of 250, and today they're going to be on 160. So you need to absolutely take that into account in your transition. Okay, common pitfalls for transition is to not have your drip and sub-Q insulin overlap for 1 to 2 hours. And I'm talking about the whole basal dose. If you end up splitting your basal into a BID, you need to run the drip 2 hours past the second dose. The whole basal has to be in there. Not leaving the drip on long enough for the rate to be stable. Okay, therefore we used it only for correction and we're not using it to help dose find. If you have the patient eat on the drip with no additional sub-Q nutritional coverage, it's kind of like a glorified sliding scale. You're just chasing it up and down. You really want to anticipate the changes there. And then when you're transitioning, not accounting for what the drip was covering, not answering correctly to what the patient's on nutrition-wise. Yes?
I have a question. So, if the patient's on the drip and say they're on continuous tube feeds and you're anticipating that those will stop, either they go NPO or they'll just be on like oral liquids, do we, like in terms of checking the current nutritional method, do we check what we anticipate they will be off of the drip or just continue on with the continuous tube?
Yeah, because you have to because it's taking into account the ISC of them on the tube feeds. So if they're on tube feeds now, but in 1 hour they're going to stop it, you press the yes, they're on tube feeds, and then when you write the sub-Q orders, you just don't write the nutritional in there. You just put the basal and the correction scale. Make sense? Any other questions? Okay. So here's a very good example of a very bad transition. They did everything wrong. They were on the drip for like 4 hours, only 2 of them being stable, okay? They didn't overlap their IV and sub-Q insulin at all. They used a home regimen, which didn't work in the first place, and they fed them that first meal without giving them any nutritional insulin. So you can see on day 2, they had higher blood, actually hour 2 after the drip, they had higher blood sugars than they even came in with. So we wasted 7 hours on the insulin infusion. Okay, if you keep them on for another 2 hours, you're going to get really good data and make a proper transition. That being said, the numbers aren't the only thing. The timing is essential. You have to make sure that overlap is there. You have to make sure that first dose of nutritional insulin is there to cover the first meal. That's why I like to transition at 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. If you transition at noon and you give their Lantus at noon and you turn the drip off at 2, there's a big question. Do you give that noon nutritional dose? Do you give that 1800 nutritional dose? And it gets dicey. So it's much better to transition during a time of stability, which is before a meal, not during a meal. Questions?
If you were going to feed the patient and continue the drip, would you just do a weight-based dose?
Yes.
Come up with a Lispro?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so here's an example of a patient. Their last 6 hours were about 4 units per hour. You multiply that by 20, you get an 80 unit total daily dose because this patient is on TPN. You take that and split it, gives you about a Lantus of 40 and a regular of 10. Even now we've updated it to give you more of a 40-60 split, so that'd be more of a Lantus like 32-35 and a regular of 12 or 14. Make sense? Okay, question 1. 62-year-old type 2 hospitalized ICU after a cabbage. He's been on the insulin drip for 2 days with blood glucose running 85 to 140s. Extubated yesterday. He's been NPO on normal saline IV fluids. Total daily dose on the drip has been 100 units over the last 24 hours. What is the most safe and effective way to transition him off the drip while maintaining good blood glucose control? A, turn off the drip and start regular insulin correction scale, Q6 hours. Give him 50 units of Lantus at the same time you turn the drip off, plus a sliding scale. Give him 40 units of Lantus 1 to 2 hours before turning off the drip, plus 12 units QAC and a correction scale. Or give him 80 units of Lantus 1 to 2 hours before turning off the drip, plus a correction scale. How many of you say A? B? C? And D? Okay, the answer is D. So this is a gentleman, 100 units, okay? He's NPO on normal saline. So that 100 units represents his basal dose. So you'll want to give him 80 units of Lantus 1 to 2 hours before turning on the drip. There's no mention of any food here, so you just put him on a correction scale. But when the diet is advanced to carb limited, hopefully, what orders are you going to write for Lispro? Yeah, 25, 26. Okay, don't forget that, because if you miss that one, sugars are going to be high again. Okay, so here's just a reminder that is our, we just went through every single step, okay? Walks you through it. So here's a case, practice case. 49-year-old type 2 brain tumor resection on steroids, continuous tube feeds. He weighs 103 kilos. His home regimen is metformin 500 TID, Humalog 75, 25, 40 in the morning and 20 in the evening. A1C is 9. These are his last 6-hour drip rates, stable in the 5s. That average is 5.45. I don't know how to get this off. Bar. Sorry. So he's on continuous tube feeds. You multiply that by 20, this 5.45, it looks like you get like 109. What orders do you guys want to write? Anyone? Bueller? Yeah. Continuous tube feeds. Yeah. So about 45 and 16. Oh, good. Yes. Was this patient ready for transition? Yeah, he looked pretty stable. Does he have diabetes? Yes. 5.45 times 20 is 109. So that's our total daily dose because he was on tube feeds. And you take that, it's about 32 and 20, 45 and 16, somewhere in there. Okay, the team wrote for 26 and 16. Blood sugar was a little high. They went up to 30 and 20, and it was perfect. Okay, does that make sense? 30, 70, 40, 60, it's about the same. Okay, and the computer's going to tell you that. So that would have been good numbers. Total daily dose is about the same. Make sense? Any questions? Okay. Here's a patient on the drip. Blood sugar is 71. You get a page. Patient AS in 733B has a blood sugar 71 and is NPO. Needs transition to sub-Q insulin. Please call. What are you going to call and say? Pardon? Why do you need to add dextrose? That's a good question. What are our top 2 causes of hypoglycemia on the insulin infusion? Yeah, so you double check, make sure the nurse is following protocol, entering everything as supposed to, or work with him or her and see if there was any interruption in any source of dextrose. Okay? Any questions there? Okay, 32-year-old type 1 DKA, home regimen's Lantus 35 BID, Humalog 15, A1C is 10. So you can see here, they gave the 35 of Lantus and then turned off the drip. What is going to happen to these blood sugars? Why? Yes, absolutely. It's only half. Okay, you need to run the drip for 2 hours past the second dose of Lantus. You can see the next blood sugar here is 348. Okay, so remember that number are notably missing indications for transition. Do not let them fool you. Do not let people pressure you. They can always do their own transition. Okay, but if you guys are going to assist, set yourself up for success. Here is another patient from today. I think so. Yay. This is my patient from this morning. Okay. He is in the ICU. He's on an insulin infusion. You can see he's very stable right here. Nothing is planned on changing over the next 24 hours. He is on continuous tube feeds. His average drip rate is about 3 units per hour, somewhere between 2.2 and 4.3. Here's his insulin calculator right here. You can see his ISC is stable at 0.05. Okay, so practice. See what numbers you guys come up with. Oh, I'll give you this one. And then the computer calculator's over there. He's on tube feeds. No plans on changing rate or formula in the next 24 hours. Okay, what do you guys want to write? Who used the paper protocol? Hands? Hands? Wow, impressive. A couple. Okay, what did you guys get for a calculated insulin dose using the paper protocol? Pardon? 60. Okay, and who used the computer protocol? What did you guys get for a calculated insulin dose? Which one? 57 and 60. Look, so beautiful. Okay, so what do you guys want to write them for? Lantus of 24 to be given daily at noon, with first dose today at 10 a.m. and turn our drip off at noon with, what else? What other insulin? Regular insulin, how many units? 9 Q6, first dose, noon, and correction scale, using which insulin? Regular, and which level? Moderate. First dose, noon. Okay, those are all the details needed to write proper orders and do a proper transition. Okay, here's what your calculator would have spit out to you if you press that button. 25 and 9, how beautiful is that? But it doesn't tell you the timing, and it can't tell you the timing because it doesn't know how to read time. Okay, so make sure that's going to be you guys clinically. Here's another case from a week or two ago. Up in La Jolla. There's a patient, type 1 diabetes, put on an insulin drip for some really high blood sugars. They came down. The blood sugar dropped to, I think, 70s. And somebody called the hospitalist for transition. Okay. So the hospitalist felt pressured to transition, I think from a nurse. And then calculated a dose, I think, of 45. We have no data. We have no data. If you had pressed the button, it never would have given you an answer. You can use those numbers to semi-calculate, but that's very difficult. It's a type 1 on a bunch of steroids and eating. So you don't have really good data. So in this case, the hospitalist was trying to write for 45 units of Lantus at night, I think. A large dose at night. And through email communication has educated us that a pharmacist told them that that is too much insulin to give at nighttime. So they retimed it for the morning. Okay, so you turn the drip off at midnight, with no basal insulin on board, scheduled to be the next morning, what's going to happen to our patient with type 1 diabetes? Yeah, they're going to be high, but even worse, what else happens? DKA. Okay, remember the entire purpose of basal insulin is to suppress glucose and ketone production. Type 1s don't make any insulin. Without basal insulin on board, they start making ketones, they go into DKA. If that occurs in our hospital, while they are here and they were not admitted with it, it is called in-hospital DKA, and that is a CMS never event. So obviously this, luckily nobody checked any ketones or a gap, but if they did, this could have been in-hospital DKA, and we don't get paid for those services of treatment, okay? So it's very important. I don't want you guys guiding hospitalists or anyone erroneously, okay? Make sure in type 1 diabetes, we always have basal insulin on board. You cannot just turn off a drip. Any questions? Concerns? Issues? Yes? Why? They got bullied by the nurse. Paige, blood sugar 71, patient needs to be transitioned.
Oh, those were in hospital?
This is the insulin drip rate. Oh, are you talking about this
First
one?
one, yeah.
That's a pause.
Oh, it wasn't off for very long.
Yeah, they paused it. Ooh, sorry. I don't know why it would stop for a second there. But they were kept on the drip and then it was turned off right here. Is there a question?
Is this one of the ones
Just use
where
the
they
power one.
Oh, lo siento mucho. Here.
But I think this was one of the ones where they might use the 200. Like it was paused for less than 200.
Possibly. I don't know. I don't know if there was DKA and that wasn't presented to me as I was just severe type 1 with severe hyperglycemia on steroids.
You guys got this PNT approved for protocol. Do we have to write a note with our recommendations?
Yes.
Is there a template to progress?
Mm-hmm.
Coming someday soon. As soon as I figure out. So we're actually gonna do it.
Wait, Kevin, come up here so they can hear you talk about
please,
this. That way La Jolla can hear
I
you.
can see you in the front.
Oh no. I don't want to be seen either. So yes, there will be a note template for transition, and it's probably going to be set up more of a drop-down box like, and it's going to be like what method you used for the transition, and it's basically going to be paper protocol, computer protocol, and other. And if you do other, you need to justify why you're going against protocol, either patient's home regimen, or there are very few reasons that you should be using the other, but then what your recommendation will be. It should be pretty simple.
Is this going to be like workflow protocol where we're actually entering the orders, or is it going to be more like a consult where we put in the note with the recommendations and then the team orders it?
I would enter the orders.
Okay. So then when are they doing?
Oh, Laura asked who enters the orders, and I said pharmacy will write the orders. I would treat it just like you would do an aminoglycoside or a Vanco.
So we're PNT approved per protocol to order the insulin transition.
Correct.
And then when are we doing pharmacy transition versus endocrinologists following and they're recommending what to do?
Well,
Is
if
this more after hours or if it's not following, they call us. Like when are we doing this one?
Right, it's whenever the provider picks, if they pick you over me. It's really whatever the provider chooses. We are not defaulting this. The provider actually has to go in and choose it. It's not defaulted. It will be included in our insulin protocols, but it is not defaulted because we still want every provider to learn how to do an insulin drip transition. So if you're rotating on one of the teams, you can please walk the providers through it, but that gives you the authority to be able to make those recommendations and put those orders in.
So part of the authorities that we also got was the ability to say they're not ready yet. Okay, so if you're not ready, you can say, and actually a good way to use this is still use Dr. Colossa's 10 o'clock transition time. So instead of the 8 o'clock, you'll probably get a couple more hours, and you might get the chance to stabilize at those times. But usually if the doctor like, no, I got to get it off. But if you say, hey, let's just watch it for a couple more readings, so when it stables, we'll transition, you can do that now.
Or just say okay and wait till 10. Because nobody usually knows. I've never had anybody call me and be like, no, it has to be like right this second.
So the other thing that we did not ask for authority to be writing the orders post-transition as follow-up for the next 24 hours, but as most of us have been doing on rounds, we kind of say, let's kind of help them tweak, the next 24-hour regimen for the first 48 hours. Because, again, we do want, I'm highly confident that we can do it better. We want to ensure that we look as successful as possible. And then
for the safety of our patients.
Correct. The other thing that I want to say, I was a little disappointed because I think that we didn't use the computer button very often. Out of 260 transitions, they have 20 or 30 times that the button pushed. I want you guys to really encourage you guys.
Button pushed and followed.
Yeah, button pushed and followed.
It was usually button pushed and then subtracted 50%.
Yeah, fudged down.
That usually happens though, especially with medicine services. So you'll give them a recommendation knowing that they're going to be more conservative than the recommendation you give them. So sometimes I'm almost more aggressive knowing that I'm going to get a reduction from what I tell them.
Well, so they have been presented the same data as medicine are two of those red services. And that we will be working with them to educate them more on transitions as well. So hopefully they will be listening to you more.
What did they say? Did they think that they were going to start putting this insulin drip for pharmacy, or I think a lot of them are reluctant to give that away, or they want to learn how to do it and they don't want to just make everything work for pharmacy?
You're going to get this more from surgery, for sure.
So is it going to be part of
CT surgery in particular?
Yeah. It'll be part of the order set that they'll order insulin drip transition.
So, but the timing is a big deal. So we do not default it as a check in the insulin protocol. I still think there needs to be a clinical decision from them when they push that button. But yes, for some of the pharmacists that work with CT surgery in particular, we know when they transition. It's not till post-op day 2, and it's usually first thing in the morning. So if CT surgery presses it on initiation out of the OR, their pharmacists, hopefully you guys are on there, they're going to know when they're supposed to transition. But usually for me, even if I'm putting in transition orders for a service, I double check with them and be like, are you sure you want to transition right now? And that I always make them confirm because so many things happen. Oh, we're going back to the OR today. Oh, we're going to do this. Oh, we're going to do that. And then we'd end up not transitioning.
So is it going to come across like an order, like a work in the pharmacy order?
Yes, probably. Since it hasn't been built out, I can't guarantee how it looks yet. But so we'll have in the order set, the transition per pharmacy, and I'm pretty sure burns, trauma, and CT surgery will probably pre-select that. Most of the medicine hospital ones, I don't know if they'll select it or not. But again,
We want you ready.
We want you guys ready, but remember who the guys in red were. We want you guys to still be talking to them, even if you don't do the transition, still be advising and teaching them on the correct way to do it, because they clearly show that they're not doing it well.
At what point do we sign off on it? I mean, is that going to be a case-by-case basis? We do the transition, or do we want to leave that order in the queue as something to follow the next day if we do work with the pharmacy, it just stays on there? Or is it something where we do the transition and we say, hey, you guys are owning it now?
Okay, so Laura just asked a good question. She said, how long do we kind of take ownership for it? How long does that transition per pharmacy button stand? I'm open to discussion on what you guys think works best for your clinical workflow. off the top of my head, you could either leave that on for 48 hours or you can use the follow-up notes and just say transitioned on, whatever, please follow for the next 48 hours and
But
make
I would leave
recs.
it as a standing order that then they take over the adjustments.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to be clear that
I wouldn't do it one time, put it that way. There's
Yeah.
more harm going to come from that.
you have to be clear that they will be responsible for the management after that point.
So we're responsible for transition, one progress note, our recommendations, what the transition is, and then our follow-up is followed in the background recommendations. We don't continue doing daily notes with recommendations.
Correct. So Laura asked, the process will be, we do the transition note, we do the transition, write the orders, and then that's kind of it for the chart. And then we make recommendations behind the scenes for, like you probably are already doing, but you follow the patient.
So it sounds like the team is like deciding right when they order the insulin drip whether or not they want pharmacy to eventually transition off.
They can. It's going to be a one-time order as well.
Yes.
And I think the one-time order is going to be utilized more.
Yeah. Because I think it makes more sense for them when they want to
Right.
transition to just
Exactly.
enter in the order then, so that we kind of know, okay, now is when you guys feel ready.
Right.
Right. The one, honestly, the one in the order set is really designed for CT surgery.
Got it. That's just wasn't true.
And, even when, I think it's really important that we still, especially as we're starting to do this, that we talk to the teams. They have to get confidence in us. We want to make sure everybody's on the same page with these. So it's not like, I'm going to just do it and then not, try to teach your teams if you can, or, when you can sneak it in.
Did you look at the times that a lot of these were being transitioned? Like, were they, how many were off in these 10 and 14
All of them,
times?
except for mine. I'm just kidding.
Hey, I had a couple.
I can just see them
I don't
putting
know.
them in at night or putting them in the night shift, and then the pharmacist is going to call and say, it's not appropriate time as long as they haven't blown out their lines or stuff.
If they are going in and putting in this order at midnight, it warrants a conversation. Because again, step one of the protocol is the patient ready for transition? That's not the ideal time to be transitioning, so they should have some clinical justification and why that needs to be done. And you can say, I don't have good data. There's not good data. That, you can put it back on them and say, I can help you, guide you, but per protocol, we can't transition. Therefore, it's taken off of your plate of responsibility. Because you only have, I think, a 10%. Did we give them fudge factor? 10%. If you deviate more than that, it's not per protocol.
And I can tell you, just looking at this data, we had a very large amount of what I call premature transitions, where we got forced into or the team decided to make the transitions. So it's really important to just stress how we need a stable patient.
Then I guess if they don't want to.
Hi, this is Benny from La Jolla. I'm sorry, there's a group about to come in, so I just want to sneak in a quick question. So could you briefly walk through how you would approach transitioning a patient who is on an insulin drip while they're NPO, but they want to transition to sub-Q as well as adding on a diet at the same time?
So you would use that number that you calculated using either method as your basal, right? And then if they're going to start a diet, so like that question we talked about, that CT surgery patient, NPO on normal saline at 100 units, right? Their last 24 hours was 100 units. You transition that patient to basal 80. And once they start a diet, that would be a Lispro 24, 25, 26. That makes sense?
Okay, so your calculated basal would essentially be half of the total or 40% of the total. And then you would add on, you would essentially double that as your daily PO or nutritional insulin for your daily dose, correct?
Your drip is telling you that it's running at 100 units over 24 hours, right? 4 units
Right.
per hour, and that's only their basal. So even though the drip is saying 4 units per hour, that's 100 units, that's only represent their basal. So if you're going to then feed them, you need to double that to 200.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else?
Question. And then in terms of like the one-time orders, are we thinking about putting pre-screening questions to make them think about if it's appropriate to transition? Like having them check, yes, the patient has been on a steady rate, like essentially all
I see
of
what
our-
you're saying.
Yeah,
Well, we haven't designed the order yet, so we can consider that.
yeah, and then or at least having like, do you anticipate any changes with diet or nutrition so that we know yes or no?
Mhm.
It saves us some time to like dig that
Yeah.
out ourselves.
I think that's a great idea.
Back to what you said about the factors. So we have
Yes.
some protocol to do the transition based on either of the two methods, so paper or calculator, plus or minus 10%. Anything beyond that is no longer needs to be protocol.
Correct.
So if it's something weird or off, it's no longer on us. We just talk to the team and say, hey, this is different. I no longer can write the orders. If you feel appropriate or if you feel like you want to do it this way, then you are responsible.
And they can always call us. You guys can always call us. You're doing it and it's off protocol. You can feel free to reach out to us and we will support you or help out with them or whatever.
So then if you do the transition and it's too early or it's weird, again, you say, we don't have enough data, I think you prefer 25.
Right. And it's just not a good time clinically that we just need a couple more hours, especially in that CCU. They are notorious for the 8 a.m. home regimen. And the pulmonary up north, phenomenal numbers. Pulmonary in Hillcrest, not so much. So a lot of the same providers. So you just wonder what goes into that. And Dr. Young was on PNC but wants to make sure Hillcrest continues educated. Any other questions? Hey, go forth and transition. We'll let you guys know when it is order is created and when you'll start seeing them and what it'll look like.